In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to build the best $2,000 gaming PC build for 2022. I'll be covering off all of the best components to select for this build, how to assemble it step by step from start right through to finish, and looking at performance numbers just a little bit later. With graphics card and other component prices now closer to MSRP than ever, it's a great time to build a gaming PC. Let's dive right into it after a quick ad from today's video sponsor. The Corsair iCUE 5000T provides the ultimate in airflow, RGB lighting and mounting compatibility for PC builds in 2022. With 3 alloy fans included, 160 addressable RGB lights in the front, roof and floor panels, Corsair have really taken things up a notch. Learn more about the awesome 5000T in our build videos over on the channel or at the where to buy links in the description below. As with all of our build guides, we're going to start off by installing as many components into the motherboard as possible. This includes our CPU, RAM and our storage. Now the board we'll be installing these into is the Asus Prime Z690P D4. I appreciate this motherboard choice kind of gives the game away as to what CPU we've gone for. Of course, basing this build around the new Intel 12th Gen platform. This is a fantastic motherboard with 4 RAM DIMM slots, PCIe Gen 5 and loads of expansion. It supports dual channel memory and CPU overclocking too. Plus with the integration of USB 3.1 Gen 2, you get super speedy transfer speeds on your rear I/O as well. Plus the silver accents are going to feed perfectly into our build. Perhaps the most important feature though is of course support for the latest Intel 12th Gen processors. And our choice today, the i5-12600K, is a marvellous option. Pop the retention cover down and the black plastic protector will fall smoothly off. Keep a hold of this in case you need to have a RMA motherboard or ship your PC for some reason, and your processor is in. One of the great things about this motherboard is its support for DDR4 memory, like this kit right here of Corsair's Vengeance RGB Pro. The new Intel 12th Gen chips do support the latest DDR5, but it's expensive, hard to find, often out of stock, and doesn't really give you much more of a performance gain, making these cheaper DDR4 motherboards an exemplary shout. Line up your memory and clip it into place. For those of you who've not done this before, it's super easy. Find the notch on the RAM, the notch on the DIMM slot, and it really is as simple as that. They only go in one way round, so don't force them. Apply a bit of pressure and you should be good to go. While we're here, we can also go ahead and add in the storage for this build, which is something a bit different. This is Seagate's Firecuda 530, but the Star Wars edition. Available in a range of different capacities. We've reviewed this over on the eBuy YouTube channel, and you can go and take a look at that video in the card section now. Arguably, it's a little bit overkill for this build, but a 1TB drive does fit in the budget and will look great in the motherboard. Now, do be careful with the latest Intel boards, as not all of the M.2 slots are necessarily PCIe Gen 4. Luckily for us though, this one is, as is the middle, as is the bottom. On cheaper motherboards like B660, this won't be the case. But you can learn more about that in a recent guide we did, comparing which motherboard chipset on the Intel side of things you should actually try and consider. I'm going to pop this into the bottom slot, as this board is one of the lucky few with widespread Gen 4 support, adding in the standoff with a teeny tiny screwdriver and pop in the SSD on top. It's going to take pride of place in our build at the bottom and won't be hidden by the GPU. We can also keep our other M.2 heatsink on for aesthetic purposes, making this a great looking system. Before we go ahead and move the motherboard into the case, a step we can now proceed with, given that the motherboard assembly is basically complete, I am just going to take this backplate from our CPU cooler box. Installing any cooler often requires the installation of a backplate to obviously clamp the cooler and hold it into place. I'm going to pop this through now, as doing so will make our life a little bit easier later. This one has adhesive on the bottom which will hold it in at least provisionally, and then obviously the installation of our cooler will further make sure it doesn't think about going anywhere. Once you've done this, you'll see some nice silver screws poking through each of the corners, and we can use those to fasten the cooler down in just a moment. But first, we're going to pick up our case, Corsair's iCUE 4000X, which we'll be using in today's build for a few good reasons. It looks visually awesome with a nice glass panel at the front, comes with 3 included RGB fans, which we've actually upgraded to Corsair's QL designs, and has just an awesome aesthetic. It's also got a nice grey and white colour scheme, which is perfect for the motherboard we've gone for, the GPU, but all will make sense later. I'm trying not to spoil this build too much you'll have to hold out to the montage at the end to see what the final result looks like. Go ahead and strip down all your case's side panels and then lay it flat on the table to install the motherboard. Something that's much easier when you're not fighting gravity to pop it into place. In this instance, all of the standoffs are in the right place because we've got an ATX board going into an ATX chassis, making this stage of the process really easy. But wait, don't forget the included I/O shield you get with your motherboard, which you need to clip into the rear of the case. And that's basically it. Nice and simple. We're then able to move on and finish what we started with the CPU cooler. Corsair's iCUE H150i Elite Capellix. It's a bit of a tongue twister, but it's going to work really well in the build today. And of course, this large 360mm radiator is going to provide plenty of cooling capacity with the perfect colour scheme. I'm going to go ahead and unscrew the existing fans at the front in order to replace the screws with these long ones that will then fasten the radiator in. So the same fans at the front are staying. Pop the radiator in first and then we'll do the water block. To install the cooler, we're going to add these posts into the silver threads that are now located on each corner around the CPU, basically screwing them into the back plate through the motherboard, and then we're going to drop the cooler on. Fasten it down with 4 thumb screws, one in each corner, that then fasten onto those posts we literally just added, and that's basically it. Remember to add a drop of thermal paste on if you've used the cooler before or it doesn't come with pre-applied thermal paste, as this will create the nice thermal bond between the processor and the cooler itself. The cooler, I think then, is looking absolutely fantastic, and we'll deal with wiring up a little bit later. Looking great. With the CPU cooler in, we can move on to the power supply before we take a look at the graphics card in just a few moments time. Now for this build, you're going to want about 750 watts or so of efficient power, and that's where Corsair CX750F comes in. A white, fully modular, as you can see from all the cables, power supply that's going to work really well for this build. With an 80+ bronze certification, it's a fairly efficient unit that's going to work well for what we're trying to achieve. I also like the fact that it has got a white aesthetic and white included cables, and they should look pretty good too. We're going to plug in a range of cables to the power supply before actually popping the power supply into the case. We're just going to pop it in this bottom rear section of the case and fasten it down with 4 screws just like so, 1 in each corner. And then you're able to plug up the motherboard power cable to the right hand side of the motherboard and CPU power connection up to the top left, a little something like so. And with those done, we can finally move over to look at the GPU. This right here is an RTX 3070 Founders Edition. With loads of video memory, support for Nvidia's 2nd gen RT cores, for even better ray tracing and more importantly DLSS, this is a gorgeous card. And these cards now, nearly 2 years after they first landed, are still not only incredibly competitive, with AMD's recent 6750 XT sort of failing to put the 3070 on ice, but also you can finally buy them for MSRP. Woohoo! These are some fantastic cards though. I love the way the Founders Edition's design look, but there's loads of different options from Asus, MSI, GeekaWhat, Palette, and more that you should definitely consider. Just go for whichever one comes in at the best price, really. What we're going to do is we're going to pull the case just that little bit closer, and we're going to hover the GPU over the lane we want to put it into. We're going to use the top slot, which means we need to take out the 2nd and 3rd PCIe covers. Push the clip back, remove the PCI covers, and slot the GPU into place. We're going to finish things off by fastening it down, and of course remembering to give it power, using the included mini 12-pin to large 8-pin PCIe power adapter, and a single 8-pin PCIe power connection. There we go, get in there. And once we've done that, we can go ahead and boot this system up and test out performance. But first, we're going to see how good it looks in the big reveal when it's all powered up in the only way we know how. I'll see you in a second, but first, roll that montage. Stuff. So this system, as always, looks pretty fantastic, but the performance numbers are arguably the most important, and we've tested a wide range of titles with this build to make sure that it really cuts the mustard. On your screen now is a summary of all the different results we were able to gather from this build in a wide range of titles. There's also some valuable temperature information on here too. We're going to go through and look at each game in more detail, starting off with Battlefield 2042. Here at 1440p high, we achieved just a shade shave under 90 frames per second. That's 88 FPS to be precise. At 1440p, the game looked visually fantastic, and it's a resolution where the RTX 3070 excels. It was a similar story in COD Vangaurd, where at 1440p with DLSS enabled, set to performance mode, we got 175 frames per second. 157 and 137 rounded off our 90 and 99th percentile results, and showed that 99% of the time, the game ran above 137 FPS. These really consistent frame rates are a solid sign of one of the latest Nvidia GPUs. Cards which very rarely drop games, especially in well-optimized titles. Even in games that are optimized to a slightly worse degree, like Forza Horizon 5, we still managed to bring in some really impressive frame rates. 101 frames per second to be precise in the latest Forza title when testing in the in-game benchmarking mode. As with all of our other tests, this was done at 1440p, but this time with the Ultra settings preset. It was once again positive news in Halo Infinite, the next title on the list. 1440p high settings yielded 102 FPS on average, with 91 and 86 for the 90 and 99th percentiles. Visually, once again, the game looked great, and 1440p gaming showed where the RTX 3070 was really at home. In Apex Legends, next up at 1440p high settings this time, we pulled in just shy of 140 frames per second. This is fairly typical of Apex Legends, a game which tends to cap out at 140 FPS give or take. Still very competitive frame rates though, at a resolution that looked visually really great. To round things off, we also tested out a bit of Fortnite, this time at 1080p competitive settings. Here we managed to bring in over 240 frames per second, that's more than 100 FPS more than Apex Legends, when testing this time around at 1080p competitive settings. Competitive settings is where you tune all the settings down to low, except the render distance, which you keep at far, in order to maximise A, the frame rate, and B, the competitive nature of the title. You guys often ask us to test out Fortnite at competitive settings, and the 3070 didn't disappoint. And with that, that pretty much wraps up not only the benchmarks, but the whole video. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to get subscribed to see more from us. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.